Thank you, may be seated. Prosecution and the third witness today, please.
We would like to call Officer Chris Williams to the stand.
Please raise your left hand, put your right hand on the Bible, and repeat after me. Yeah. I, Officer Williams,
I, Officer Williams,
swear to tell the truth,
swear to tell the truth,
nothing but the truth,
nothing but the truth,
so help me God.
so help me God.
Please state your name for the record.
Chris Williams.
State your occupation for the record.
I am a police officer in New Columbia.
How long have you been a police officer?
I've been a police officer for 22 years.
Your Honor, I would like to submit Officer Williams' affidavit. Please read the two portions.
I work in the Family and Domestic Violence Division of the Force. During the past 5 years, I have taken a year's worth of police training courses on handling domestic violence situations, including a meditation course and a course on identifying and dealing with victims of battered woman syndrome. And I testify in court on a regular basis in domestic violence cases. I have occasionally testified as an expert witness.
Thank you. Please explain to the court what had happened when you got the call on January 5th, 1995.
Me and my partner were in our patrol vehicle when we got a call from dispatch saying that there was a domestic violence situation called in by a neighbor at Keith and Camilla Khan's household. We arrived at the house at 10. While my partner stayed in the vehicle to radio back to dispatch, I went up to the Khan's door and knocked. Their daughter, Jamie, answered the door and then told me that her parents were fighting in the living room. When I was nearing the living room, I could hear shouting and screaming. I also heard a male voice yell something like, "Will Vorts."
Alright. I would like to submit the New Columbia incident report. Please read this section.
I heard a male voice yell something that sounded like "Will Vorts."
And this highlighted section down here.
How could he explain the broken lamp?
What did you observe while entering the living room?
I observed that Mr. Khan's face was visibly red from shouting, and he was obviously angry. Meanwhile, Mrs. Khan, she was shaking from head to toe. She was crying. She was obviously scared. And while I was looking around the living room, I noticed that nothing seemed to be broken during the argument, so the broken lamp is irrelevant.
Please explain what you did after this.
I separated Mr. and Mrs. Khan. Mr. Khan stayed in the living room while I went into the kitchen to talk to Mrs. Khan.
Please explain what you observed before talking to Mrs. Khan.
Mrs. Khan was still shaking, she was still scared, and she was constantly looking over my shoulder to see what her husband was doing.
Please read this highlighted portion.
She told me that in the course of the argument, he had slapped her across the face and threatened to kill her. She said he had used the Tulgarian phrase "Walters," and that in English that phrase meant that he was going to kill her.
Thank you. Please explain what Mrs. Khan told you when she calmed down.
When she calmed down, I asked her what had happened. She told me that they were having an argument on whether or not she could have a part-time job. And she then told me that during the argument, he had threatened to kill her and slapped her across the face. I then informed her that in the U.S., a slap is a violent act. She then went further on to telling me that he had slapped her a few days earlier when he got angry at her, and she was really afraid of him. After I talked to her, I went into the living room to talk to Mr. Khan.
What happened when you talked to Mr. Khan?
Before talking to him, I noticed that he had calmed down a lot. I then asked him what had happened. However, he didn't have much to say except for that he was really upset that his wife had lied to him and didn't understand why his wife was so upset. I then asked him to go outside on the front step.
Explain why you asked him to go outside.
I asked him to go outside for 2 reasons. One, so that he could clear his head and get some fresh air. The second was so that I could explain some procedures to Mrs. Khan. It is my duty to inform the people of the procedures that are available to protect them and their family.
What did you explain to Mrs. Khan?
I explained to her that she could file for a civil protection order, and then I explained to her that filing for one won't have her husband be arrested or go to jail or have them get a divorce. Instead, it would be protecting her from future abuse and her family, her kids, from witnessing any future abuse.
What happened after this conversation?
She told me that she didn't want to file one, so I advised her to stay with a relative or friends, and then she then asked if I could drop her and her kids off at her parents' house. I then filed an incident report.
Please read this highlighted section.
In my experience, she fit the profile of a victim of domestic violence. Mrs. Khan exhibited behavior consistent with an abused woman.
Thank you. Explain why you believe Mrs. Khan fits within the profile of a domestic violence victim.
Mrs.
Objection,
Khan,
Your Honor, speculation.
Sustained.
Mrs. Khan exhibited.
Whoa.
No, you can't.
Sorry.
Why does Mrs. Khan fit the profile of a domestic violence victim?
She was, when I first arrived, she was shaking, she was crying, she was basically terrified, and when we were before talking, she was constantly looking over my shoulder, and she was blaming herself. She didn't believe that anything was going on in her house, and she believed that her husband could change. These are classic signs of domestic violence.
Thank you for your time.
Defense, your witness.
Please state your name for the court.
Chris Williams,
Please state your occupation.
I'm a police officer,
How long have you worked with the New Columbia Police Department?
22 years.
You were trained in dealing with victims of battered women syndrome? Yes.
That's correct.
Could you explain what battered women syndrome is?
It's basically like abused women who are getting hurt by their significant other.
On what time did you answer the call about the Khan household?
10 o'clock at night, p.m.,
What date was that, my love?
January 5th, 1990.
Jamie Khan, the couple's 8-year-old daughter, answered the door, yes?
Correct?
While witnessing their argument, you proceeded to separate the couple?
Yes.
And you proceeded to talk with Carmia Khan first, yes?
Yes.
Approximately how long did you talk with her?
I talked to her for like an hour, a little bit more.
Carmia had told you that a slap was part of the culture.
Objection, hearsay.
Sustained.
Are you aware a slap is necessary in a Targaryen culture?
She did tell me that.
The phrase wall tears was said by Keith during the argument, yes?
Yes.
Are you aware the phrase means I will cleanse you?
I am aware.
With a different meaning to the phrase, does this change the altercation between Keith and Carmia?
It might.
I want yes or no.
Yes, I guess.
After speaking with Carmia, you spoke with Keith for about 5 minutes, yes?
Correct.
During your conversation with Keith, was he generally calm?
He was.
And Keith didn't act like a violent man.
No, he calmed down after the argument.
Your Honor, I'd like to submit the affidavit. You can just read it.
He didn't seem violent, and I noticed that nothing in the living room looked like it had been broken during the argument. He also didn't appear overly controlling, which is a classic characteristic of a batterer.
So, Keith didn't seem controlling, which is a classic characteristic of a batterer, as you said. So, can we conclude he's not a batterer?
Objection, conclusion.
That's all I know.
defense may call your first witness.
The defense would like to call Jamie. Please stand.
Please raise your left hand and put your right hand on the Bible and repeat after me. I, Jamie Kahn,
I, Jamie Khan,
swear to tell the truth,
swear to tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth,
and nothing but the truth.
so help me God.
So help me God.
Would you please state your name?
Jamie Khan,
And how old are you?
I'm 8 years old.
Where do you go to school?
I'm a third grader at the Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary School.
And how are you?
I'm very smart. I made the honor roll last year.
How many siblings do you have?
I have a sister who is 2 and a brother who is 4. That makes me the oldest, which I like a lot.
What do you think about the tooth fairy?
I know the tooth fairy isn't real. I caught my father slipping $5 under my bed when I lost my tooth.
What do you do normally in your free time?
My friends and I like to play detective games since I want to be detective. And we like to hunt ghosts at the haunted house, but I know it's all make-believe.
Do you know your father's role in your culture?
He has to take care of the money and discipline the mom and the kids when we go against the Togarian faith.
And what would be your mother's role in your culture?
She has to take care of the children and cook and clean.
And what is your role in your culture?
I have to obey my parents and respect the Togarian faith.
How do you feel about lying?
I know what's wrong. My parents told me not to lie, so I don't. Once I did lie about breaking a vase, and when my dad found out, he hit me really hard with a
Objection
belt.
narration.
Sustained.
Your Honor, it's a child.
I'm aware of the age of Jamie. Jamie, can you shorten your story for a little bit and answer the nice man's question?
My dad hit me with a belt, and I learned my lesson not to lie.
Please describe if there was any chart or changes in your mother's behavior recently.
She used to be so kind, she wouldn't even kill a fly, and now she's getting really cranky. She's always in the kitchen cooking for something. I think it's for Terry Sellers, her friend. And she's even started hitting my
Objection
brother.
narration.
Sustained. Jamie. A little short answer. But thank you.
Sorry.
Please describe an instance where your mother took your father's role of discipline.
Well, once my brother was whining, and he started biting my mom. And my mom said, "You'll be sorry for what you did." And my mom,
Objection narration.
Jamie, can we skip the part where your mom acted like your dad?
I am.
Quickly?
Well, it looked like my mom was going to pour boiling water over my brother's head, so I yelled, "Don't hurt Michael!" And that's not her role.
Jamie, thank you. We need that every time.
What stopped her from pouring the water?
My dad ran in and took the water and poured it down the sink and slapped her.
And how did your mom react to being slapped?
She fell face down on the ground, and she then ran out crying.
Okay, Your Honor, I would like to submit the affidavit of Jamie Kahn.
Then he hit my mom across the face. Next thing I knew, my mom was on the floor face down. I guess she just fell down. It all happened real quick. That's all that happened. There wasn't any blood or anything like that.
What did your father do after the accident?
He took my brother Michael and I up to my room and read us a story. It seemed really sad that he had to hit Mom.
Can you describe what happened when your mother came back?
Her eyes were puffy, and she hugged me and said she loved me and that she was sorry that I had to see everything and that her and Dad would work things out.
Was there any indication that your mother was in pain?
She held her tummy like it hurt, so I asked if she had a tummy ache, and she said yes, but that she'd be okay.
Could Your Honor, let's yeah. Just read that part.
But she lied to me, so things are not okay.
What caused your mother to take you to your grandparents?
One night I woke up to my parents screaming and I answered the door. There was an officer there and he told me to go to my room, and later that night they got taken to my grandparents.
How do you feel about staying at your grandparents with your mom and your siblings?
I'm not really happy about it. I really miss my dad and I just want our family to be happy again.
That's all you're on.
Thank you.
Can you please tell me your name
Jamie Kahn?
and you're 8 years old?
Yeah.
And you have 2 siblings, right?
Yes,
Your family is of the Togarian faith, correct?
that's correct.
And you're staying with your grandparents right now, right?
Yeah,
Is your father the reason for this?
no,
Who is the reason?
it's my mom. It's her fault.
Okay. Does your father maybe sometimes hit you?
Yes, but it makes sense. It's fair.
Is this on purpose to teach you lessons?
Yes,
Does it hurt when your father hits you?
yes,
Do you ever see your dad hit your mom?
yes,
And your dad does this to correct her?
yep,
Your mom deserves this?
yes.
Objection, Your Honor, speculation.
Sustained.
That is all.
Great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Defense, may call your next witness.
The defense would like to call Keith Kahn.
Please raise your left hand and put your right hand on the Bible and repeat after me. I, Keith Kahn,
I, Keith Kahn,
swear to tell the truth,
swear to tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Please state your name for the record,
Keith Kahn,
and where were you born?
Togiari,
When did you immigrate to the U.S.?
1971.
And what is your profession?
I'm the CEO of Kahn Properties, a real estate company.
What is your preference of workers?
I prefer to be around people who share my Togarian values.
What was the main reason for starting a company?
I wish to have financial security to start a family.
Do you own a tech company? Yes.
I worked at a tech company, but now I'm in real estate.
What was the main, when were you and Carmia married?
January of 1985.
And what kind of ceremony was the marriage?
Traditional Togarian ceremony.
What was the responsibility of the husband in the Togarian marriage?
The responsibility of a husband is to be the provider and sole disciplinarian of the family. When the wife or children step out of line, it is the
Objection narration.
Overruled.
husband's duty to appropriate.
So why would Togarian husbands discipline the family?
Togarian husbands would discipline the family because they would sometimes act out of line and not represent the Togarian values that Togarian people would uphold so profoundly. So when the wife or children do step out of line, the husband's job to keep them in line and prevent them from acting like childish.
Your Honor, is that the?
Togarians also believe that the man is the disciplinarian of women and children. Discipline is not to punish, it is used to teach right from wrong. A mother should not physically discipline her children because not willingly to hit a child.
According to your culture, what is the traditional way of discipline for the wife?
A simple slap across the face.
Your Honor, I'd like to.
She's very gentle and wanted her to fly. She takes care of the children and keeps them happy by taking them to the park. Our problems began about 2 years ago when Carmia met an American, Terry Sellers, while she was taking her children to the park.
How would you describe Carmia before she met Terry?
Carmia was very gentle. She was a great wife and a wonderful mother. She would take the children to the park and teach them Bulgarian values. She kept everyone very happy.
How many times did you discipline Carmia before January 2nd, 1995?
5 times. I felt terrible about every single one of them.
And when did Carmia meet Terry?
About 2 years ago.
That explains that. Never mind. Could you describe the effects on your marriage after meeting Terry?
Carmia started to develop a rebellious personality, a defiant one at that. She began to stop asking for my advice at work. She would often cut conversations short. She started to begin worrying about the children less, and she started to develop a mindset that was unlike the Bulgarian faith.
Yeah, that explains that.
The first was on January 2nd, 1995. I came home from work around 6 o'clock. I walked in the front door and I heard Michael screaming. It wasn't the kind of screaming like when a child is angry or upset. It was a scream of pain.
Could you describe the scene when you walked into your house on January 2nd, 1995?
When I walked through the front door that night, I heard a cry of pain from the kitchen. It sounded like Michael, and I rushed into the kitchen and I saw Carmia with a boiling pot of water because of the steam, and she was hovering over Michael.
Yeah, that explains that.
I rushed toward her and I grabbed her arm so she would drop the pot in the sink. I grabbed the pot by the handle. It was so hot that I just dropped it in the sink.
What did you do when you saw Carmia with the boiling pot of water?
I rushed to her and I grabbed the pot. It was very hot, so I just dropped it in the sink. And then I proceeded to move Michael out of the way and I slapped Carmia across the face. She ran away screaming and I tended to Michael.
Yeah, that explains that.
Looking back, I know I didn't mean to hurt Carmia that day, but I needed to protect Michael.
Was the amount of discipline necessary for that moment?
I believe it was. I never meant to hurt Carmia in any way, but I needed to protect Michael.
Yeah, that explains that.
I was going through the mail and found a $75 check and a note addressed to Carmia thanking her for the wonderful dishes she had prepared. I was absolutely furious that she had been deceiving me. How am I supposed to trust her when she lies to me? Instead of apologizing for what she had done, Carmia started yelling at me.
Can you please describe the events that occurred on January 5th, 1995?
I walked into the door and I saw the mail. The mail contained a card and a $75 check. The card read, thanking Carmia for all the wonderful dishes she prepared. I confronted her about this and she started yelling at me. And I was so confused because I didn't understand why she would deceive me like that. It wasn't very Bulgarian thing. She was supposed to ask me first. I then told her she was no longer a good wife and mother. I then ripped up the card and check and simultaneously slapped Carmia across the face and said the phrase volunteers.
How did you use the phrase volunteers at that moment?
So in Bulgarian culture, volunteers means to cleanse. I never meant to hurt Carmia, but I just simply meant that she needed to return the ways of the Bulgarian faith that she was born and married to.
The police were later called. How long did Officer Williams talk?
About a total of 5 minutes.
What did you feel when Carmia left?
I felt very confused. I never understand why she left, but she was destroying her family.
How did the incidents occurring on January 2nd and 5th impact you and your family negatively?
Honestly, her and our dynamic, she took the kids away. And I just don't really like it because the whole point of me starting Con Properties was to start a family. But now with this case, it could split a family and everything I worked so hard.
Objection narration.
Sustained.
How would this impact you if the civil protection order was filed against you?
It would also hurt my reputation along the Bulgarian and business communities. And also, it would just completely shatter our family, and I don't want that to happen.
Cross exam.
Could you say your name for the record?
Keith Kahn,
Could you say your age, Mr. Khan?
45 years old,
When did you and your wife get married?
January of 1985.
Carmia was 17 when you two met, was she not?
Correct.
How old were you when you and Carmia met?
I believe I was about 35.
You then married only a year later, did you not?
Correct.
How many times have you slapped your wife during your marriage?
5 times.
You got into a conflict with your wife on January 2nd, did you not?
Yes.
During this incident, you entered the home and saw Carmia holding Michael in a pot of water, did you not?
I saw her with a pot of water hovering over Michael.
But I said you saw her holding a pot of water and Michael.
Yes.
Your first reaction to this was to remove the pot of water from her hand and slap her, was it not?
No.
Your Honor, I would like to present the highlighted section of the respondent's affidavit. One moment, let me find this real quick. Okay. Could you read this, Mr. Khan, this underlined section?
I guess I pushed her hard enough to knock her down because she fell to the floor.
So you did hit her?
Define,
You made physical contact with your wife, did you not?
yes.
You hit her hard enough to where she fell to the ground, did she not? Did you not?
Sustained.
When you hit her, she fell to the ground, did she not?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'd like to reference the affidavit. Could you please read this highlighted portion of your own affidavit, please?
Carmia has always been a wonderful mother. She's very gentle and won't hurt a fly.
So even though you said Carmia would never hurt a fly, you still attacked her during this incident?
Objection, Your Honor, argument.
Sustained.
Even after knowing Carmia, like in your opinion, Carmia would never hurt a fly, you then still attacked her?
Yes.
You then got into a conflict with your wife on January 5th, did you not?
Correct.
This fight was over the fact that your wife had been selling dishes of food in her spare time, was it not?
Yes.
You said the phrase "wall tears" during this argument with your wife, did you not?
Yes.
You said this specific phrase with a calm voice, did you not? Your Honor, I would like to enter the article, let me find it real quick, let me get it for you. Anatomy of a word into the record. Thank you. Could you please read this highlighted section of the article?
In some cultures, like the Bulgarian one, a calm voice can at times signify severe disapproval and danger, while in other cultures, such as the North American, a calm voice means love and warmth.
As someone who grew up in the Togirian faith, this would leave room for misinterpretation on Miss Carmia's part, does it not?
Objection, Your Honor. His name.
That will be all.
Thank you. We're gonna take a brief recess until Friday.
Do you see where it says to stop the live stream?
Yeah.
You got it?
Judge, can I have a lollipop?
Can we just get round applause?